Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products brought you the greenest home products for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now let's get to the show. Today's show is...
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe an experience becomes truth. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor, and thank you for joining us. In our first hour, we're discussing the paranormal and metaphysics, and in the second hour, our guest will teach you how to manifest your dreams into reality.
Our first guest is a leading expert in the paranormal fields. Rosemary Guiley has 60 books published with a wide range of mystical and supernatural subjects, including 9 single-volume encyclopedias, and her books are translated into 15 languages.
Rosemary continues to do groundbreaking research on shadow people, as well as the Jinn, who are entities involved in different kinds of paranormal encounters as well as problems. Now, Rosemary has also consulted and investigated cases where individuals were under apparent attack by these supernatural forces.
Her current work focuses on interdimensional experiences,
hauntings,
the afterlife,
past lives,
and spiritual growth.
So please welcome to the studio, Rosemary Guiley.
Yes, Guiley is in the house. How you doing?
I'm doing. Tony and Eddie, it's great to be with you tonight.
Well, we are so excited to have you here with us, and it's going to be a great show because we've not had you on the show before, and there's a lot to talk about. And you, looking at your resume and books and experience in this field, wow, I'm impressed already, first of all. And I want to get to the point where most of our people may have not have heard of you. Could you give us a little rundown of your background and how you got started in this field of paranormal?
And metaphysics.
Yes.
Like a lot of people who wind up working in this field, I had childhood experiences with the paranormal. You know, people see ghosts or they have meetings with angels or fairies. In my case, I had angel and fairy experiences. Didn't start
I'm so happy.
Until much later in life. And it really fueled my curiosity about what's out there. And also the fact that people do not uniformly experience the paranormal. When you're a kid, you think everybody has the same experiences. And when it comes to the other world, you find out as you get older that it's a very different picture than physical reality, that some people see things, other people don't, some people disbelieve, other people totally believe. Well, for me, these other realities were real. They were always a part of my reality. I never doubted them, and I've never doubted them my whole life. And it really propelled me into wanting to know more about them, how our experiences happen, why they happen, how we learn from them, what's going on with humanity throughout history. And so that really fueled my career. I worked as a journalist after I got out of college, and that was hard news. I did hard news and also trade publications and corporate publications for about a decade, and then began my solo career, which was my dream all along, to be independently self-employed as an author, researcher, investigator. So over the years, since then, it's been over 30 years now, I've gone beyond just researching and writing to doing a lot of other things as an investigator. And I've expanded my own skill set to include readings. I polished up my psychic skills, and I offer readings now. I do past life regressions. I do dream consultation. I do entity regressions. And I've got a finger in just about every paranormal and metaphysical pie that you can think of. And to me, it's wonderful because they're all interrelated. Everything feeds into everything else. And so it's a never-ending process of discovery about who we are, why we're here, what we're connected to. It's really part of our soul growth. And it's an exciting work to be in. I never really have a dull day at all, ever.
It doesn't sound like it.
No, and I'm in the same boat with you. I've done readings now for over 20-some years, and people will ask me often, and I'm curious to see what your response to this is, Rosemary. They'll say, don't you get tired of being in your office doing readings for 25 years? Because people really kind of mostly ask the same 3 subjects, and that's love, money, or career. I call it the big 3. And once in a while, you'll get somebody like you in there that wants to know about soul's growth, evolution, these experiences that you're having. That's my favorite. But the reason I can do it is because no 2 people have had the same experience in their life, and no 2 people think or believe the same way about any topic. And so for me, it's all refreshing and exciting, but I'm dying to know with you and doing the readings, what's your favorite part, A, of doing the readings, and B, when did you dive back into doing them?
Well, I'll answer the second question first because it's the shortest answer. I've always been interested in dreams, and especially dream symbols. I think in terms of symbols. I've always responded intuitively to everything that symbols have to say. And, of course, that's a big part of doing readings, is to intuit things. And, you get symbols of things, or at least I do. The information I get comes in symbols. And dreams also come in symbols. And the tarot is a set of symbols. And I started studying the tarot when I was a teenager and started giving informal readings, when I was in my 20s, just to friends and family. And then I expanded from there. I studied energy healing, and that also was another symbol-oriented profession because I found that I got in by examining people's auras and opening myself up to impressions, and also from the guides around them, that the information would come to me in symbol form, and then I would have to interpret the symbols, what the content of the symbols were. That's, to me, is a fascinating process. And your other question about, what's the most exciting part?
Yeah.
It's for me. It's I've always looked at readings as a tool to help people make the best decisions for themselves. And I've always told my clients you should look at a reading as it shows a potential outcome of forces in motion. And so what are those forces in motion? Where they're going? Are they going the way you want? If not, then how can we change things? So a reading really is helping somebody arrive at their own truth, to validate their truth, or to see where they need to get back to their truth, and to help them find their power. I've never looked at readings as telling people what they ought to do and what they ought not to do, because that takes people's power away. Yeah. And the reading should empower people, and that's always an exciting process for me. And I really put a lot of energy into it. When I sit down, when someone asks me for a reading, that's permission. People think that psychics walk around looking at people's auras and knowing what they're thinking and things about them. And my gosh, you don't want to do that. You just be overwhelmed, and not to mention the fact that it's invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
Right.
But when someone asks for a reading, that's permission, to get information about them. And so I will start getting information. I will start getting impressions. And whether or not I'm doing a reading in person or at distance, it doesn't matter. I will see things in their aura. And I always use the tarot. The tarot is a very important part of the process. If I'm personally with someone, I bring psychometry into it. These are all tools that just stimulate a flow of symbols and information for me. And then I start talking. And I tell people that I don't want to know why they're there for a reading in the beginning. I just want to see what Spirit has to lay down on the table first. And usually what Spirit has to say is at the heart of what they've come for anyway. And then we take it from there with their questions and concerns. So I look at it as more of a spiritual consultation than anything else. That I think it's useful to get readings. Everyone needs to sort of tap in to another perspective every now and then for course corrections and to validate things and to help wrestle through really tough decisions. And so a good reading, I think, helps people find their own truth and also enable them to pursue what they feel is their truth. I see so many people who are, they've either become disempowered or they feel disempowered. You know, they get battered by people, by circumstances, by behavior patterns that were drummed into them at very early ages. And they're looking for ways to find themselves. And so I think readings can do a very good job at helping people in that way.
Well, I love the fact that you're one of those intuitives that are out in the world that don't tune in to just everybody. I have lots of friends who are psychic, and they will say exactly what you just said. They're like, I can't even go to the grocery store without being impacted by everybody's energy and thoughts. and the joke is you're nosy, because you're just trying to tune into people for whatever reason. I love that you ask permission, as it were, and then they give you permission by saying, will you do the reading? I love that. But listen, I'm about to bust here. Because, Rosemary, I sincerely want to know about some of your earlier fairy experiences, if you're open to talking about that before we speak about the shadow people and the Jinn.
Oh, yes. Well, I think they were very typical of a lot of people. I've interviewed people over the years about their fairy experiences. I've done a couple of books on fairies. And I found that a lot of people have had experiences very similar to mine. And most of mine happened when I was, like between the ages of about 4 and 6 or 7. And then after that, they started to fade off. And I've also found in my research that in regards to children's connection to the other world, for many children, certain kinds of experiences begin to fade at around age 8. And something seems to happen in the maturation process of children, their socialization in the world. Maybe it has to do with the way the brain is developing too, or how they're being engaged in school or whatever, that the inner world becomes, the outer world starts to supplant a lot of the inner world. And for some people, they never lose all of that inner world, and hopefully none of us ever lose all of it. It's the interior world is a very important part of growing up and maintaining a connection to everything that's out there. But my experiences were, having invisible playmates, and I just considered this to be real, that you would go out in the yard and, you would have these invisible playmates. They were not invisible to me, but they were invisible to other people. And I had invisible pets, probably fairy animal pets. And I spent a lot of my time when I was very young alone. I have an older sister who's 12 years older than me, and she was pretty much out of my life for a good chunk of my growing up, because she was off in high school and then college. And so I spent a lot of time by myself, and I think that fuels the inner life as well. And this was perfectly normal to me. And then for these little people to be present at night, to, sit in the bedroom, very common experiences. And I've also talked to parents whose children have described little visitors like that in the bedrooms at night, and they're rather alarmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these are very benign. These fairies have an interest in children. They're the playful kind of fairy. There are lots of kinds of fairies, from the good, the bad, and the ugly. These are very playful fairies. They enjoy children. And I think that they really facilitate part of a person's interior life at a very important stage in life. Then my angel experiences were, I didn't see the angels, but I could feel them around me. I knew they were angels. And I couldn't understand why. Now, the angel experiences lasted until I was older. And then as I got older and I started to study these things in a more objective way, I've always had a connection to the angel realms. I still have a connection to the fairy realms as well. But I did not see the angels. I considered them real, that they were not just biblical creatures or, drawings on Christmas cards and things like that. Yeah. But they were real beings, and I could feel them around me. And at night, they would come and sing while I was going to sleep. And if I was spending a lot of time by myself, they would come and sing around me. I could feel them like a circle around me. So those experiences I found were very typical of a lot of people. And many people, as they grow into adulthood, they look back on those experiences and they think, oh, that was just kids' imaginations. Well, the word imagination is very important, because without imagination, we would not experience those other realms. The experiences were not fantasy, i.e., they were not made up like hallucinations. But the imagination is that faculty, that inborn faculty that we're all born with, that enables us to bridge these other realities and have these experiences. So people should not dismiss them as just kid stuff or play stuff or, some sort of fantasy. They are real experiences.
Yeah, I've always said that the imagination and your intuition are twin flame souls. You can be the best psychic on planet Earth, but if you have a very poorly developed imagination, for whatever reason, you can't receive as clearly through your other feeling faculties. That's just my impression. I know Tony's dying over here. He's got a question for you.
No, actually, you kind of answered it. I was going to ask you if you hit a certain age and the fairies became less and less, but you said you still had a connection with the fairy realm. So that kind of answered the question. So that was my question, if there was an age that you lost that ability.
Well, I would say it was probably around age 8 or 9 that I started to have fewer and fewer of those experiences. I was out having other experiences. I was learning more things at school and taking up hobbies and, different things that occupy your attention. Mm-hmm. And years and years later, when I started researching the how and why of our otherworldly experiences, it was the literature in the past life recall area that really caught my attention, and then caused me to look further into other kinds of experiences, that this is a natural drop-off age for spontaneous recalls and kinds of experiences. For example, children who have marked spontaneous recalls of apparent past lives, they may talk a lot about when I was, or, when I was your mommy, that sort of thing, or when I lived here and I did that. And some of these recollections are quite vivid, and they go up until about age 8 or 9, maybe even 10 or so. And then children will stop talking that way. And these things just sort of fade on their own, or, like I said, they get engrossed in other things.
Right.
Well, the thing with the fairies was, having had those experiences, I've always been intrigued by the fairy realm, and I'm a voracious reader, so I've always read lots of accounts of them, as well as all of these other beings that I've studied over the years. And so later on in my career then, I I really hadn't had an active connection to the fairy realm for quite a few years. And I reestablished that, and it wasn't hard to reestablish. The connection was just lying dormant. And in the 1990s, I took a trip to Findhorn, which really kicked it into high gear. And I went during summer solstice, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. Much to my dismay, I found that Findhorn was, it was not the same spiritual dynamic community that it had been. And in fact, some of the people who were in charge of the place were very disdainful of all those old fairy experiences. But I connected with people who had been there for a very long time. They said, well, for the believers, if you still believe and you hold that light open, you'll have your experiences. Right. And I certainly did. And after I came back from that trip, I was living in Maryland at the time, and I suddenly became aware that we had a very marked fairy presence that was not only outside in the yard, but there was a being who came into the house a lot. And I think he'd been there all along. He'd just been under my radar. And I came back with, I think, fairy vibes around me, and he made his presence known. I called him Sam. I asked him what his name was, and he said it was Sam. And we had a 3-story townhouse, and he liked to stay in the downstairs where he could have easy access out to the yard. And he wouldn't always like other people in the house. He'd get a little bristly. And I did have some people friends who were rather psychically attuned who came to stay once, and they wouldn't stay downstairs. They said, one of them said, "You've got a troll down there." I said, "It's not a troll." All right, well, he likes you, but he doesn't like other people down there in his territory.
This would be an interesting question.
I stayed with the townhouse. I live in Connecticut now, and my husband and I divorced, and I moved, and I invited Sam to come with me, but I knew he would stay attached to the land.
Yeah. Wow. This question just popped in my mind when you were telling this story. Do you think the fairies have a type of connection or bridge between humans and their pets as well, especially if you're living more on the countryside as opposed to living in Manhattan?
I think in the countryside you have probably an easier way of connecting with them, but they're definitely in urban environments too. Oh, yeah. And at the time that I had my experiences with Sam, I was living in the suburbs of Annapolis. It's not a huge big city metropolis, but definitely suburban area, and yet I had that connection, and I have. I've never lived in in the inner city like Chicago or New York. I've lived on the outskirts of New York, but never in a big city like that. But I have talked to people who still have connected with fairy presences in densely populated urban environments. They're more of a household kind than a countryside kind. And yes, there's a definite link between fairies and pets and humans. And I think that, the fairy animals that I experienced, they were very much like pets. And in fairy lore, fairies have their own pets as well.
Yeah. That's why I always feel guilty when I see a mouse, and I'm like, oh, my God. And little grasshoppers and butterflies. This is the part of the question of the hour, but tell us about shadow people.
Well, these are rather dark and disturbing entities, and I started studying them about 11 years ago, and I launched a lot of research projects based on inquiries I get and things that people ask me about, and I see patterns in a lot of that because things come in waves and patterns. Yep. And it's an indicator, kind of like a barometer to me, of what's going on with people in terms of their consciousness and their experiences. And so I got quite a few inquiries about these dark shadow visitors. and I decided to investigate further. Almost all of the experiences talked about human-like forms that were solid black shadows who were basically bedroom invaders. They showed up at night in people's bedrooms, stood by the bed, came out from under the bed, out of the closet, did not have any facial features, occasionally eyes, but usually solid black, and they seemed to emanate this incredibly malevolent, hostile, even evil energy. And some people would be attacked and feel physically attacked, but these beings, although they look solid and they could block out things behind them, they could go through walls, disappear as smoke, and people wanted to know, what in the heck are they and what do they want? They don't communicate. Some of them didn't do anything. They just seemed to stand and stare. People would be paralyzed in bed, and many people thought they were demons because they were black. And so I launched an investigation and started interviewing people and collecting stories. One of the things I do in my research is I will collect a lot of data and then sort it out to see what patterns show up. Are there patterns in appearances, behavior, circumstances of their manifestations, types of people that they approach, response patterns in people, all kinds of patterns to look for. And through a process of elimination, which took quite some time, I eliminated ghosts, demons, astral beings, thought forms, fairies, ETs, and arrived at Jinn. And once I hit on Jinn, everything made sense in terms of the behavior of these entities. Now, Jinn are a supernatural race of beings that we share the planet with. We share the planet with a lot of beings who aren't in this physical reality. They vibrate at a different rate, but they still share the planet with us, and Jinn are among those. And in their lore, they preceded us, and like the fairies, with whom they share so many characteristics, it's hard to separate them from fairies, they lost out to the dominance of people. And the ones that we seem to be involved with are hostile to us. They're known to be very tricky and deceitful and carry grudges, and they're very supernaturally endowed. They have lots of powers that we do not. Not all of them are bad. Like people, they have a range of personalities and motives, but we're skewed toward the negative end of things when we deal with them because others don't even want to bother with us. So Jinn, I think, take this form of shadow people for the purpose, many purposes. Some of them are intent on getting energy off people. They can vampirize people for their life force, and when they scare you, they get a bump of energy off you. Some of them are attached to the land. They are energized by the land, and if you build a house on their land, then they feel they have rights to your house and you.
Oh, wow.
Some of them become attached to people, and some of them are like terrorists. They're out looking for opportunities to, create supernatural mayhem. And all of these things fell into place after many, many years of investigation and studying the data. And shadow people take other forms. They don't always show up in the bedrooms. They can be seen during the daylight. Sometimes they can be sent away easily, and sometimes they cannot. But they are also heavily involved in our other entity encounter experiences because they're shapeshifters and they like to hide themselves. Their name literally means the hidden ones. So I believe that they are capable of showing up as mysterious creatures, Bigfoot, aliens, fairies. They can mimic ghosts of the dead, poltergeists, a lot of things that we associate with other kinds of entity activity. They can disguise themselves and participate in that, and they are also disturbingly heavily involved in the ET abduction scenario. Whether or not they work in collusion with ETs or against them, or they're spying or whatever, they've got their own agenda going, and they the evidence exists that they have been involved in that all along. Now, I had known about the Jinn for some time through a lot of my other research, but these discoveries really propelled me on a path to know more about them. And in the second book that I did on them, called The Jinn Connection, I explore their links to ancient aliens, the ancient gods and demigods, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Archons, the Anunnaki. I think that all of our experiences with godly-like and supernatural beings in ancient times need to be reevaluated to take the Jinn into account.
Well, before we go on, I want to take a break for our sponsor. It's about just 15 seconds. So you're listening to Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
And we'll be right back with
Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Be right back. Today's show is sponsored by Adventures Unlimited Press. Take your mind on a literary journey and go to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase books from our famed experts featured right here on Truth Be Told. That's adventuresunlimitedpress.com. Now, back to the show.
Hi, and welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And we have with us the extraordinary Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She's talking to us right now about the Jinn and the shadow people, and I am fascinated by the connection between the ETs and the Jinn. And you were just getting ready to talk to us a little bit about some of the evidential information associated with that.
Well, I discovered this connection between the Jinn and the abducting ETs through the shadow people data that I was collecting. And I noticed as I sifted through hundreds and hundreds of reports, I've got a rather extensive database now, and many more accounts online aside from that, that people, not all of them, but what struck me as an odd percentage of people volunteered that they had also had ET experiences, mostly abductions. Some of them were just contact experiences. And it would be thrown in like, I've also had ET abductions, if that helps any, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Why are so many shadow people experiencers also having ET abductions? Because you don't run into that with ghost experiencers and Bigfoot and, angel experience, things like that. It was a direct connection. So I went back to my database, asked more questions, started including ET abduction questions in my original questions that I would ask new interviewees. And discovered even more connections that, yes, there was a direct link between shadow people and ET abductions, and that they had both types of experiences. Not that shadow people participate in the abductions, they usually do not, but they precede abductions and they follow abductions. And so then I thought, well, okay, we've had several decades now of literature about ET abduction. So if it is true that this is a bona fide connection, the evidence will be in the literature. And so I went back to the abduction literature, which I've been fascinated with for decades. I've followed for decades, and reread books by major abductees and authors, and it was like picking up pebbles on a beach. All these descriptions of shadow people, before and after abductions, shadow-like beings that were seen like during abductions when people felt they were aboard ships, and no one had really picked up on it. And I tried to talk to a number of researchers about it, what they might think about it, had they noticed this, had they pursued it. And I was either brushed off or got no response, with the exception of Ann Druffel, who with D. Scott Rogo chronicled one of the first abduction cases to be written up in Western literature, the 1950s Tujunga Canyon.
Oh.
And Anne was very familiar with the Jinn, but she hadn't really factored that into the equation. Just hadn't really thought about it that much. And in fact, really the only ufologist who gave Jinn any importance at all was Gordon Creighton, who now deceased, but he was the editor and publisher of the Flying Saucer Review in England. And he said, I think it was either back in the 70s or early 80s, he said if ufologists paid more attention to Jinn, they would have the answers to a lot of their questions about the ETs. And again, it goes right over everybody's heads. And so I think it's because the Jinn never really entered our entity lore in the West the way other beings did who were imported with many other cultures. They're primarily discussed and known in Middle Eastern lore, which does not make them Middle Eastern. And no entity follows human cultural, racial, ethnic, geographical boundaries. They're everywhere. They just go by different names. And the Jinn just came into our culture as, silly genies in a bottle. And we've never taken them seriously and never really known anything about them, except for people who have delved into the Western magical tradition. And there you get acquainted with the Jinn, because it all comes out of the magic of King Solomon, which is a backbone of the Western magical tradition. So here were the Jinn, skating under the radar, operating in this form of shadow people in many ways, in hauntings, in bedroom visitations, vampiric attacks, incubus, succubus attacks, ET abductions. What else were they doing? They seem to be doing everything. And why? Well, they've got no single motive. They're not cookie cutters. Some of them have personal agendas. Some of them have group agendas. Some of them want to be entertained. Some of them are, it's everything from the trickster to the street corner bully to the terrorist. Got all these things going on. And I think that characterizes a lot of our entity encounters. We tend to want to pigeonhole them as they're either all good or they're all bad, or they're all this or they're all that. And they're just as varied as human beings, any entity you want to look at. So it broadens the picture of what's going on with us supernaturally quite a bit, and in some rather disturbing ways, because if they are able to operate by stealth, what are they really up to? What's going on? They're not sitting down for interviews to tell us what's going on. So what are they really up to? And I have a great deal of respect for them. And I don't think they're all bad, but some of them are definitely out to insinuate themselves among people and take advantage of us, and to do so in ways that most of us are not aware of.
Well, I see there is a saying that you are mistress of the unknown, and I'm looking at you're a beautiful lady, and you've been doing this a long time. So I want to know, because Eddie and I've interviewed a lot of people, and they're about the light and the bright, and you have a tendency from your books to deal with a lot of the, I guess, considered darker side of the paranormal. What fascinates you about that side of the genre of paranormal?
I did not go looking for it by any means. And actually, I like to tell people I work both sides of the fence, the light and the dark. They're interrelated. And actually, if you're going to really know one, you have to know the other.
Right.
And what I find, especially in metaphysical circles, and even to some extent in paranormal circles, people are, when they become interested in these things, they're very much focused, and rightly so, on the good stuff.
Right.
They want to have the good encounters. They want to work in the light, whatever. And they have a tendency to ignore this dark underbelly, which is not going to go away just because you think it's not there.
Right.
It's still there. And people have troubling experiences. There's an axiom in occultism, in esoteric philosophy, that when you step onto the path, if you are earnest about stepping onto the path, your light goes out into the spirit realms, and all kinds of spirits take notice, and some are helpful and some are harmful. The brighter your light gets, that is, the more powerful you get spiritually, and the longer you stay on your path, at some point you're going to have encounters with the dark side. And for some people, it may be a lot of experiences, and for other people, maybe just one or two. Mm-hmm. Everyone's on a different path. But I have found so many people totally unprepared for dealing with anything negative or troubling because they have ignored it, that they've really shut themselves off from an important part of their overall spiritual education. So this is not about a fascination with the dark side. It's about being educated about both sides of the fence. And I've always advocated that to people, that you don't have to become a disciple of the dark side to know about it. You're not energizing the dark side to know about it. You are informing and armoring people if you can promote knowledge of it and how it operates, you are armoring them and enabling them to deal with it when it happens, in whatever way it happens. And the dark side will usually work through people. It's not green slime running down a wall.
Right.
They usually work through people who have the appropriate weaknesses that they allow that stuff to come in.
And I think as we get older, especially people that working in this field, we always as a child, we used to see as light is light, dark is dark. And now that I'm starting to get a little older and middle age, that I see light is not always light and dark is not always dark. Because I interviewed a reverend of the Church of Satan, Satanist, who was very delightful and really told me about their Church of Satan, that it was, this is his words, but it was actually very humanitarian. It was nothing dark at all. So, telling the truth or not, I just, what we've been taught it's always been the darkness. And so do you agree that what we've been taught is not always the light, and sometimes what we've been taught is not always the dark?
Well, things for us, especially in Western culture, they've been very polarized to be either good or bad. And actually, in all of these areas, in the paranormal and metaphysical, there's a huge murky gray area in between, which is constantly shape-shifting. And even what appears to be dark has its purpose in the world. So I think that in many respects, organized religion has shortchanged people by giving them a very truncated perspective on the spirit realms. Yeah. So when I started my career, I was, angels, fairies, mystical experiences. I did ghosts and hauntings. I've always been involved in ghosts and hauntings. I was doing paranormal investigation way before it got to be a reality TV thing, unfortunately.
I know.
And I discovered over the years that what I would call dark side things kept coming my way. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I also found that when it came to dealing with certain types of cases, like spirits pestering, infesting, attaching, things like that, I had some ability or wherewithal, or I don't know whether you want to call it fortitude, for dealing with these cases that other people did not or did not want to do. And that cases that would really seriously unbalance other people didn't affect me in that way. Wow. Which is not to take it cavalierly or lightly. No. The paranormal can destabilize people in a hurry if they're not very well grounded. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And so I think there is something to the truth. The people who work in this field, they like to say, well, you're called to it. You can't, it's not something you can decide to do. You're called to it. And I think that's what happened to me.
I do too. One of my favorite intuitives, she said to me, you did not choose this work, it chose you. And it feels the same with you, Rosemary. It's like this work chose you. There's a great quote by Anthony DeMello. He says, what you are aware of, you are in control of. What you are not aware of is in control of you. And one of the things that we keep getting from you today, or I do especially, is you bring your light to the table, but you're giving information so that people are equipped to handle certain things they might not have normally been privy to. And like Tony said, you're very beautiful. You're amazingly articulate. You can tell you come from your heart when you speak about this. So it creates a platform where people are a little bit less afraid to learn because of what you do. So you're definitely on the leading edge in that way. I have a couple of interesting questions I would like to ask you. Mental illness, schizophrenia, and that sort of thing. Do the Jinn, in your opinion, based on your research, do they have a tendency to attach to people who are more schizophrenic or imbalanced in a mental illness type of way, or does it just not matter who they attach to?
I have seen a skewing in that direction, and this has been borne out by research that goes back almost 100 years, at least in the West. And it's difficult to say, well, did one thing cause one thing, or is it symptomatic of? But for example, take investigating cases. If I get called into a case and I find out that there's always one person in a household who's the focal point, regardless of when you've got troubling activity going on. Even if other members of the household are experiencing it, there's usually one person who gets the brunt of it.
Yeah.
And if I find out that that person is schizophrenic, bipolar, chronically depressed, or has suffered from PTSD, then that changes the whole scenario because they have gates open that are very difficult to close, if they ever close. And this is especially true with schizophrenic and bipolar people.
Yep.
So so the question is, did entities somehow get a hold of these people and cause those conditions, or are these conditions, they just have characteristics that keep these gates open?
Right.
And my personal opinion is that they have the right mix of stuff that just keeps these gates open. Yep. And they are extremely difficult, in some cases impossible to close.
Yes.
And you have a very complicated scenario where people are in need of medical help, and they are getting medicated, and sometimes the medications will exacerbate these gates. And you have a medical establishment that doesn't buy the spirit world. That the visions and the voices are hallucinations and not actual spirit manifestations. It becomes very problematic for these individuals. Yes. And trying to get rid of things that come and stay around some of these people, every case is different, of course, and if they're involved in problematic relationships, or they're living in a low energy area, that happens quite a bit.
Yes.
Then it becomes you can't get rid of things. It's like sweeping out ants without getting rid of the original nest. They just come back.
Yes.
And I don't know what the solution is for those people. And they're not getting the right kind of help from the medical establishment, and the paranormal community, the alternative healing community, can only do so much.
Right. That's fascinating. We literally have 1 minute left, and I'm like,
we need to
gobstruck
now. We hope that we can make this part one, and we hope that you will come back again, because such fascinating information you're giving us and our listeners and our viewers.
And we've never heard it before. We've been doing this for years. And honestly, Rosemary, we have never heard a lot of what you're sharing with us. And I know Tony's fans are just like pee-peeing in their pants.
Well, before we let you go, is there any lecture workshops that you're going to be doing in upcoming days that maybe some of our listeners or viewers might be able to come to?
Well, my next big event is in Michigan, and now I won't be out in California until January next year. I'll be doing a conspiracy cruise down the Mexican Riviera. I will be at Conscious Life Expo in February. Between now and the end of the year, I'm on the East Coast and the Midwest a lot. I'll be in Salem for Halloween. That's always a big event. I have an afterlife conference in Scottsdale coming up at the end of Arizona. My full calendar is on visionaryliving.com. That's my main website. And then I also have a site devoted to the Jinn called jinnuniverse.com. And that's DJINN universe.com.
Got it.
Well, you are all over the place and such a fascinating, lovely lady. And we so are honored to have you on the show today. And we want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rosemary.
And please go to visionaryliving.com and check out all of her books and upcoming events and workshops and lectures. And we hope you come back very, very soon. Thank you, Rosemary. Really appreciate it.
Well, good evening. I'd love to come back.
Yay. Thank you so much. That's great news to hear. We love it. All right. Talk to you soon and have a great week, okay?
Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye now.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have our next guest not in studio. I always say in studio, but he's on the phone. Mark.
Dr. Dream Peebler.
Peebler. I love it. It's like Keebler, but Peebler.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. We'll be right back on Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
Don't go anywhere.